Welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is entitled Science Inquiry, Working Scientifically, the Same or Different. And the first thing I'd like you to do is go on to Mentimeter, which I will show you in a moment, and consider and put in your vote for whether they are the same or different. Okay, so if you haven't voted and you're still doing that, that's absolutely fine. You can carry on doing that. There's a little bit of a split of opinion there, with 8 people saying no, they're not the same thing, and 4 people saying yes, they are. So that's what we're going to explore and think about this afternoon. So I'm going to argue and present the case for they're actually 2 different things. And I think it's actually useful for teachers to think about them as different things as well. So I'm going to try and present an argument for you to justify that this afternoon. But first of all, let's just go back to the national curriculum. We have 2 aspects to the national curriculum. We have the knowledge statements. These tell us what the pupils need to know. And then we have the working scientifically statements, which tell us what the pupils need to be able to do. I'd like to present a case that the working scientifically is the means, it's the vehicle by which the children will learn and acquire this knowledge and these skills. So the science inquiry provides the children with the opportunity to learn or apply the knowledge that we're hoping they're going to get, and also gives them the opportunity to learn or apply those working scientifically skills. And I think it's useful to think about those 3 aspects as quite distinct. And when planning, we need to think about each of those 3 things. We've been talking about in previous webinars about the science inquiry process, so I'm not going to go through this in detail, but science inquiry is basically the process whereby children are asking questions, often supported by the teacher, or as they go through the school more independently, and then they're gathering data in order to be able to answer those questions. And our national curriculum explicitly talks about 5 types of inquiry, which again, we have been talking about and thinking about in the past. So I'm not going to go through those, but I've just flagged them up there for you just to be remembering those. So I like to think about the working scientifically and science inquiry as 2 separate things. So the science inquiry is the process of answering the questions, but the working scientifically skills are inherent and absolutely vitally important. If the children don't have the specific skills that they need, then they'll not be able to carry out the science inquiry independently. Another way of thinking about it is using this parachute analogy. So we've got a backpack there, which can be filled with all sorts of useful things. And this is a little bit like the children that we are trying to fill with the knowledge that they need to meet the national curriculum. So we can put all sorts of things into our backpack. If we just throw the backpack out of an aeroplane, it's just going to fall at very high speed, land on the ground at high impact, and probably break or damage everything that's inside it, which is obviously not desirable. Likewise with the children, if we try and stuff them full of lots and lots of knowledge very, very quickly, and then they go through the learning process too fast, then we may be in danger of not identifying any misconceptions that they've already got or alternative conceptions that they've drawn for themselves. And we're also not giving them the time to actually apply that knowledge in different situations. So it's not necessarily going to be very well embedded, and therefore it's more likely to get forgotten. So it's not that sticky knowledge that we keep hearing about. So the parachute can help the backpack slow down. And I like to think that the science inquiry is the way that we can slow the learning journey down for the children and actually enhance it and make it a more pleasurable and beneficial experience. So the science inquiry will help the children come across that knowledge in different contexts, give them different experiences on which to hang the knowledge, give them more opportunities to apply that knowledge, and therefore it's more likely to stick. The canopy of a parachute on its own, without the strings, just is a flapping piece of canvas. And I think that actually the inquiry process, the science inquiry that the children are doing, if they haven't got the working scientifically skills, then that can very much feel like it's just them following a set of instructions from the teacher, because we need them to get through the process to answer the questions, but they're not actually taking any control for themselves. So we really need to build in these working scientifically skills so that the science inquiry is much more independent and they're able to take control, like the strings can be used to control the parachute. So I think it's really important that we do think about the science inquiry differently from the working scientifically skills. And we really do need to think about planning both of them explicitly into our lessons. So what are those inquiry skills? We're just very quickly going to have a little quiz. So while I flick over onto the Mentimeter, if you can think about what are the working scientifically skills, and you'll be able to put into up to about 10 different skills. So these are the working scientifically skills that are involved in carrying out the inquiry activities. So I will just leave you to pop those in now. Okay, thank you very much. If anybody again is still quickly putting in their final answers and wanting to submit, do feel free to do that. So you can see we've got a nice array of skills there. Questioning, asking questions, planning, observing, measuring, reporting, evaluating, concluding, plotting graphs, so presenting. So lots of ideas there. And actually, I don't think there's anything missing that I can think of, but we'll look at that in a moment on the next slide. Interesting, that classifying that somebody has put in. And I think that is an interesting one, because we've been talking about classifying being an inquiry type, where children answer a question which gives a yes/no answer. So is this material waterproof, yes or no? And that would be an inquiry. But in the national curriculum, it does talk about identifying and classifying within the working scientifically skills. And I think there is the skill of classifying, where children are asking a question and sorting it in yes and no, and general classifying, where we're not necessarily using it to answer a question, such as how can we sort these animals? There's no specific question, but we are using some classification skills. So that's an interesting mix between a working scientifically skill and a type of inquiry. Okay, so just looking back at the national curriculum for Key Stage 1, see there you can see in that fourth bullet point, we've got that word classifying. The Key Stage 1 curriculum, working scientifically skills, are quite easy and manageable to handle. Whereas when you go on to lower Key Stage 2, suddenly we've got an awful lot more of them, and they're very lengthy. And when I've looked at them, and when I've been looking at with them with my colleagues in the plan team, there's a lot of things that cross over between the two. So they're not particularly very helpful to support teachers with planning these specific skills into lessons. So what I'm presenting here are a set of 10 skills, which for me are helpful to encompass the national curriculum. And they're applicable across the schools, although some of them are not applicable to Key Stage 1. So the last 3, concluding, predicting, and evaluating inquiry, are not explicitly mentioned in Key Stage 1. That doesn't mean that the children wouldn't be asked to, you might not ask a child to think what might happen, which would be loosely a prediction, but to be a scientific prediction, it either needs to be based on some data that's being gathered, which would be in year 3 and year 4, or year 5 and year 6, a prediction would be based on some actual scientific knowledge. Whereas in Key Stage 1, the children are making an educated guess, but probably not a scientific prediction. It's not in the curriculum. It doesn't mean the children can't do it, or you wouldn't expect them to on occasions do it, but you certainly wouldn't need to assess it. The other distinction I'd like to make is between interpreting results, which for me means answering the question, and drawing conclusions, which is about explaining the answers, explaining why that is so. And again, children in Key Stage 1 don't have the subject knowledge necessarily to draw a conclusion, but they would be interpreting the results and asking questions. Likewise, with evaluating and inquiry, children in Key Stage 1 really do not have, they will be changing, they'll be evaluating as they go because things don't go quite right and they want to change something, but they wouldn't necessarily have the recall to be able to explain what they've done afterwards. So all of those skills are relevant to the different types of inquiry, which I've put around the side there, but clearly some of them are more relevant to some types of inquiry than others. What I would suggest is that teachers need to be thinking about both the type of inquiry that their children will be experiencing during the lesson, and then also then specifically which skills are the children either going to be taught, they're going to be learning that new skill, or they're going to be practicing a skill that they've already been taught, or you're seeing whether they've got those skills. Or sometimes you might just scaffold it so that you might give them the question so we don't have to spend too much time on that, so we get through to being able to spend more time evaluating inquiry. So what I'd like, next slide. So this is something that teachers might use to help them with planning those types of inquiry and the skills into lessons. And you can see that I've blocked out some of those skills because they're not relevant to particular types of inquiry. And we don't want to end up in the situation where teachers are trying to squeeze a working scientifically skill into a science inquiry where it really does not fit. So what I'd like you to do is just have another think about these skills and think about which ones are easier to teach, which ones are harder to teach, either because of the complexity of the skill or because they're skills that seem to just be happening more often. There's more opportunities for them to happen, and which ones perhaps might get a little bit neglected or forgotten. So what I'd like you to do is go on to the Mentimeter again. And I've written the 10 skills there, and I'd like you to rank them in order from easiest to hardest. So number 1 will be the easiest one to teach, either because it's the most simple to do or because it's the one that seems to just crop up more often. Okay, again, if you're still putting your answers in, then please feel free to add them in. This is a little bit like the Eurovision Song Contest and watching people ping around, different countries ping around. Interestingly enough, I think what's been consistent is that Observe Closely has been ranked first as the easiest to teach, and Evaluating an Inquiry has been consistently at the bottom there. And I think that is absolutely what I would be expecting, both because of the ease with which children can access that skill. Right from early on, the children will be making observations. Even in early years, they'll be encouraging to make observations. It's just the sophistication of those observations that they're making, the way that they're recording them, and the level of detail and the language and vocabulary that goes with them that we'll be developing. And then evaluating inquiry, particularly when you look at the national curriculum in upper Key Stage 2, it's actually really quite complicated. And I think it's a double whammy on that one, because not only is it more complicated, it also tends to happen at the end of a lesson where actually we've run out of time. So that's where it's useful on occasions to really think about, I'm going to scaffold quite a lot of the process so that actually we've got time to make sure that evaluation is properly taught and the children have time to do it. So these are some of the skills that probably during the next half term, during webinars in the future, we will be looking at these skills and breaking them down and thinking about how to teach them and what they should look like at the different year groups. And certainly to evaluate an inquiry was one that somebody was asking about last week on the webinar in the chat, so that will definitely be featuring. Okay, so moving back to the slides. So this grid I think is useful at the planning stage to help teachers monitor what am I actually covering. So it can be just a tick and a date or however is the most simple. So as a teacher's going, okay, so today the children have been doing some research, and I did actually expect them to evaluate what resources they were using. So you just pop a tick into the research row and the evaluation column. Over the year, I would expect there to be ticks in each row to show that the children have engaged in all the types of inquiry. And I would expect there to be ticks in each column, showing that each of those skills has been taught and practiced. You wouldn't necessarily expect there to be ticks in every single box. That would probably be rather artificial fixing. So that just helps teachers make sure that they're covering all those different skills, but we still need to make sure that we're doing them at the appropriate level for the children that we've got in our class. And the next few pages in this document, which I'll show you how to access later should you find it useful, gives the statements linked to the national curriculum for what those skills in those inquiry types would look like in the different year groups. So this is the upper key stage 2 grid, and we're just going to focus on that particular statement there. Be able to ask a range of yes/no questions to aid sorting and decide which ways of sorting will give information, useful information. So at key stage 1, this would be simplified down into asking a simple yes/no question. In lower key stage 2, they're asking a range of yes/no questions, and then through to upper key stage 2, where they're asking a range of questions which will give them useful information to answer a bigger question. So you can see the progression is there. So teachers can plan which skill they're going to be teaching and also make sure that they're modelling and expecting the children to be doing it in line with the national curriculum. So the document, I've put the web link on the slides here, and you'll be able to get the slides by emailing us, and Bennett has already put it onto the chat, the email address to contact us. I'll just show you where they are just in case. So if you go onto our website, which the website address is at the bottom there, and you click onto resources, you will then get a page that looks like this. And if you click onto our resources, and the document is there, it's called Working Scientifically Skills Progression and Tracker Sheet. So you can just download it from there, should you find that useful. Oh, I've actually already done that. So we've done that slide already. So just to summarize, I think, and this is why it's important that I think that we as teachers or people supporting teachers think about these 3 elements of science separately. So we've got the knowledge that we need the children to acquire, and the way that they'll do that is often by learning that knowledge through science inquiry processes, or they'll be applying that knowledge through the science inquiry. But be able to do that science inquiry independently so that they're actually being the scientists and not the teachers being the scientists, they need to develop the working scientifically skills. So for each inquiry activity that the children are engaged in, I would suggest that we need to be thinking about which skill am I teaching them today? What am I going to model? What am I going to help them be better at by the end of the lesson? So there'll be some skills that we're teaching. There'll probably be other skills that the children will be using during the lesson, and we can either use those as an assessment opportunity to assess the things that we've taught in the past and how well those skills have been embedded, Or it may be that we're assessing a skill that we haven't taught in the past, and we just give them a little bit of a free flow to see what they're able to do. So it's assessment for learning opportunity. And then sometimes we might just scaffold a skill because we can't spend hours and hours doing everything or letting the children have total autonomy, because we'll never get through to the end of things. So particularly if we want to leave time for evaluating, for instance, then we might give them all the same question. We may even tell them how to do it and give them the resources, and we may give them a table to fill in, because then they can get the data very quickly. The investigation will probably go, we've planned an evaluation because we know it's an investigation that doesn't give good data. So there's no point spending lots of time gathering data that's not going to answer the question anyway. And I'm thinking those parachute investigations in particular. And then we leave ourselves time to actually do the evaluation, which is the point of the lesson. So I'll just leave you with the parachute analogy. We've got the knowledge that we need the children to learn. We've got the inquiry processes, which will help the children to apply that knowledge. And then we've got the working scientifically skills, which will enable them to be independent, but also they'll be applying those within the science inquiry. The session next week will be about using Explorify to support and challenge pupils. So thank you very much. I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to head over and look at the chat. Happy Easter, everybody. I hope you're able to have a little break. Luckily the weather's nice, so we can all be out in the garden and enjoying that. So happy Easter, and maybe see some of you next week. Goodbye.